Hello guys and welcome back to our channel. Now, if you watch Kendrick Lamar's Super Bowl halftime show, you know for sure that it was more than just a performance. It was a powerful statement. Now, despite being an excellent rapper, Lamar faced backlash from MAGA supporters who deemed the show boring or garbage. Now, we obviously know why. It's very clear that Lamar's message was loud and clear, and it's precisely that message that's got MAGA supporters up in arms. By celebrating blackness and confronting the harsh realities of American history, Lamar challenged the narrow post-woke vision of America that MAGA supporters cling to. Now, in this video, we'll take a look into the historical and political significance of Lamar's performance. From the lie of 40 acres and a mule to the subtle yet potent symbolism woven throughout the show, we'll also hear from the Gen Xers who are bravely educating their own community about the ignorance and articism that's been perpetuated for far too long. So with that said, let's get into it and talk about what Kendrick Lamar's performance really meant. I will be right back.
You can't tell me any different. This halftime show is garbage. Be mad at me. It's garbage. Garbage. Of all garbage. Hot trash. A fire dumpster. I'm not impressed.
You know, one of the lines that has become clear to me in Kendrick Lamar's performance last night is 40 acres and a mule. And that line is particularly potent for many Black Americans. And it happens to be a line that I remember from my education growing up in grade school in the Bronx. And I vaguely remember what it was about. It was something that was promised enslaved people. I can't remember whether I was told it was before or after emancipation, but it had to do with the Civil War. And I've since had my memory refreshed. And it was something that the federal government promised enslaved people that they would get, and it would help them get a head start. But as with many promises given to Native Americans, they didn't come through. And I never really equated 40 acres and a mule because it was not something that really ever touched my life. But in thinking about it this morning, I never really equated it with something else that was very important to American life, which was the Homestead Act. Now, if you don't recall the Homestead Act, for some reason, there's a lot of American history that was that really stayed with me. And the Homestead Act was an act that the federal government felt was extremely important because they wanted to populate the Midwestern part of our country, the prairie. And so they offered 160 acres free and clear to people who would farm the land, ranch the land. I guess it was really only good for farming, but they would give free and clear 160 acres to people, and they had mapped out a huge swath of prairie land. And it was white people who took that land, and that's how a lot of our Midwest cities came into being. And they didn't rescind that promise. They gave 160 acres to people free and clear, and all they had to do was stake it out. And this may be apocryphal, but I seem to remember in class hearing how there was a date and they had people lining up and they set off a bell and you could just go and stake out your plot of land and it was yours and you could farm it. And that was the beginning of generational wealth for a lot of white people. A lot of these people came from Germany and Middle European countries, and they got a stake in this country. And here we have enslaved people who were brought over against their will and finally released from bondage and promised for their servitude they would be given 40 acres and a mule, and a mule, and they got nothing. And they had to start from scratch. Just a thought. Think about that. Think about how you'd feel if that promise was made to you and then you were just blown off. Okay, that's it.
You know, there are a lot of political meanings in Kendrick's Super Bowl show that I noticed. So I'm going to urge you to go back and watch his performance while thinking about American history and politics. Consider actor Samuel L. Jackson as Uncle Sam. Who or what does this version of Uncle Sam remind you of? And has Samuel L. Jackson ever played a role like this before? Or is he representing, as some have suggested, how black artists get policed in mainstream spaces? And then you can consider the stage. If you think of the mass incarceration of black Americans, what does the movement on the dancers on the stage represent to you? And then consider the color scheme of red, white, and blue. Does it cause you to consider who can be patriotic or who the American flag belongs to? And when that flag split in half, what do you think Kendrick Lamar was saying? Consider the American workforce, too, from the 1600s through the 1800s. Who built America? And what did it mean when those dancers bent over while we heard 40 acres and a mule, which is one of the many broken promises at the end of slavery? Now, you may say, I don't want politics at my Super Sunday halftime show. And I would ask, then why do we sing the national anthem? Why do we have a military flyover? Why do we have the presentation of arms? Because it's America, and we love to have our sports and our history and our art. And what Kendrick Lamar did was just deliver a very patriotic, historical, and entertaining Super Bowl show.
I didn't watch the game, but I watched the halftime show because I really like Kendrick Lamar. I have a 25 and 23-year-old daughters, right? So I gave them a musical education. They gave me a musical education. And I'll never forget the first time that they played him in the car like 10 years ago. And I went, who is this? Who is this? And they told me, and I was like, play more. And now I love it because when they're DJing in the car, especially my youngest daughter, she'll put them on because she knows I really like them. I want to make a point. I know everybody is doing their deep philosophical takes on the halftime show, but this is just something that occurred to me. Many years ago, a person in my life who is no longer in my life, but is now MAGA, right? That didn't exist back then, but we were at a museum looking at art, and it became clear very quickly that in her mind, the only function of art is to be beautiful. That's it. There is no other function of art. Like if you have to think about it, or if it's even remotely ugly, she completely dismissed its value. And she was like, why would anyone want to look at art that's not beautiful? And I'm like, and I loved my art history classes in college. And so I'm trying in earnest to help her understand why art isn't just to be pretty and to make us happy. Now, here's the point. The halftime show is just another example of people like her, who we now have a term for them. We call them MAGA or MAGA. And that is, they don't want to think. They only want a thing to be the thing. If it's beyond that, they get angry and they get mad and they get frustrated. So last night, all the halftime show for someone with that kind of brain, all it's meant to do is sing and dance and entertain. That's it. Anything beyond that is too much for their little brains. And not only is it too much, it makes them mad. It pisses them off that they have to think, that they have to go, ooh, is there like a deeper message to this? Now, I think he did a really good job of making some of the messages not so obtuse that it gets lost. I think some of it was maybe a little obvious. I don't know. But they don't like that. They don't, especially when it comes to Black and brown people, don't do anything other than entertain me, give me a good experience, and then you go off and do your thing. They don't want any Black or brown person to actually challenge us or cause us to think or to wonder or to ask questions or to no. And they would see doing that at a halftime show as extremely inappropriate to do, because your job is to just entertain us. So anyways, I don't know if that matters. But it's just something that struck me this morning is that they're so surface level, they're so one-dimensional, that to think deeply about these things. And this is a guy who won a Pulitzer Prize for his lyrics, right? So he's obviously going to make us think, but they don't like it. It pisses them off. And just one more thing, I love all of this was happening in New Orleans. I don't know why, but that gave me a lot of satisfaction. And I nearly fell out of my seat when I saw Serena Williams. I could not believe it. I was telling my daughter, I was like, oh my God. I was like, that's Serena Williams doing the crip walk. And I was like, she dated Drake, because I'm chronically online. And she was like, yes, Mom, I know. She's like, okay, take a deep breath. Anyways, it was great.
Hey everyone. This is your friendly neighborhood history teacher. On this channel, we look at current events through the prism of history because history doesn't repeat, but it sure does rhyme. Let's talk about Kendrick Lamar's Super Bowl halftime performance. If you caught it, you might have heard him drop the line, 40 acres and a mule, this is bigger than music. But what does that mean, and why does it still matter today? Flashback to 1865. After the Civil War, Union General William Tecumseh Sherman issued Special Field Order 15, a plan to give newly freed black families land, 40 acres each, sometimes with a mule. It was supposed to be a fresh start after centuries of slavery, but history took a different turn. After Lincoln Nation, President Andrew Johnson reversed the order, returning land to the former Confederate landowners. Instead of economic independence, many black Americans were forced into sharecropping, trapped in a cycle of poverty that lasted for generations. Since then, 40 acres and a mule has become a symbol of broken promises in the fight for economic justice. It's been referenced across pop culture, from Kanye West's We Major to Jay-Z's The Story of O.J., to Public Enemy and even Spike Lee's production company, 40 Acres and a Mule Filmworks. These artists aren't just making music or movies, they're keeping the conversation alive. So when Kendrick Lamar dropped that line during the Super Bowl, he wasn't just rapping, he was reminding us that the past still shapes the present. The conversation about reparations, economic inequality, and racial injustice is ongoing, and history shows us that unfulfilled promises don't just fade away, they fuel movements. What do you think? Should the U.S. have honored its promise of 40 acres and a mule? How would things be different today if they had? Drop your thoughts in the comments.
Listen, I'm not the right person to break down all of Kendrick Lamar's halftime show. There are much better equipped people out there, but I can give you some historical context for the part, which made a little history teacher ears perk up, where he said 40 acres and a mule, this is bigger than the music. So 40 acres and a mule specifically comes from Union General William Tecumseh Sherman. He had issued these field orders, which basically proclaimed that as Sherman was marching to the sea from Atlanta to Savannah and then marching up the coast toward Virginia, while Grant is marching kind of down towards Virginia, trying to squeeze Lee in the last year of the Civil War. Sherman says, as we conquer, liberate the people and this land, you're going to get some of this land eventually. You'll each get 40 acres and a mule. We're going to give you the support and the long-term stability that you need. This eventually gets backed up by Congress and the Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton. Obviously, there were, 3.5 to 4 million formerly enslaved black people, so that is not going to cover all of them. But the idea was that, this was the start, and this was the symbol of the federal government's commitment to providing for the long-term stability of all of these newly freed black Americans. Unfortunately, for a lot of reasons, Abraham Lincoln was Lee surrendered on a Sunday, Lincoln was Friday. He didn't even get the weekend to celebrate the win. And so unfortunately, the task of rebuilding the South and punishing the former Confederacy falls to Andrew Johnson, frickin' Johnson. So in a very politician-y move, when Lincoln was running for re-election in 1864, he chose as his running mate Andrew Johnson, who was a Southerner, a Democrat from Tennessee who had refused to secede along with his state, basically stayed with the Union and the federal government. The problem is that now Andrew Johnson is the one in charge of what to do with the South. And of course, he wants to let them off essentially scot-free. He's like, let's let bygones be bygones. The 4 million formerly enslaved people, they're now free. Let's all move on. And even though Congress is dominated by what we call radical Republicans, remember, Republican is the party of Lincoln, the party of the big federal government and emancipation in this moment. Even though they're dominant in Congress, they still have to make compromises. They still have to get
all of Congress to agree on their plan, especially so that they have enough votes to override Johnson's inevitable veto. So the radical Republicans can't be quite as radical or extreme in their Reconstruction plans as they want. So instead, they shift their focus from land ownership for Black Americans to wage labor. Let's make sure that we can ensure that these Black Americans can get jobs where they will get paid. And unfortunately, what this means is that a lot of these formerly enslaved Black people end up working on very similar jobs, sometimes on the same land where they were enslaved, for their former enslaver, now still a wealthy white landowner. And so millions of Black Americans are kind of entrapped in this cycle of debt. Because of course, land ownership is the most valuable source of wealth, and especially generational wealth in our country's history, and they don't get it. And the white Southerners who all committed treason get to keep their land. Yeah, they lose their enslaved workers, but so the generational wealth stays in the hands of the white elites.
Now, while the main action was on the field of play as the Philadelphia Eagles beat the Kansas City Chiefs, denying Travis Kelce and his teammates a third consecutive Super Bowl crown, the halftime show is, of course, a big part of proceedings. And this year, it was rapper Lamar headlining the halftime show. And like any good Super Bowl performance, it was full of talking points. And this is what we're going to be looking at. Now, Lamar's action-packed halftime performance began with acting legend Samuel L. Jackson, who was dressed as Uncle Sam. "Salutations, it's your Uncle Sam," the actor said. And this is the great American game. One fan took to Twitter to explain a theory behind the move. Now, they said Uncle Sam dates back to the War of 1812, when slavery was still rampant and continued being a symbol of patriotism. Trump calls Americans patriots, which many feel is cold. That people felt perpetuated the marginalization of Black people. Tonight, Uncle Sam was Black. Now, America, as it was portrayed on that stage, was Black. During a time where diversity is actively being legally stripped away in many forms in this country, Kendrick Lamar sent a strong message right in front of the president that we built this country, no matter what you and yours may think. Now, as Black people continue to celebrate the subversive and powerful Super Bowl performance delivered by the one and only Kendrick Lamar, MAGA supporters have taken to social media to express their confusion and disapproval regarding the halftime show. Now, Lamar said was a bold statement about the current state of America as President Donald Trump watched live as the first sitting president to attend a Super Bowl. Like I said earlier, actor Samuel L. Jackson dressed as Uncle Sam and narrated the extravaganza as Lamar brought high-fee culture to televisions across America. Now, the GNX rappers' Black backup dancers wore red, white, and blue, which reminded everyone in attendance that despite attacks on diversity, we are and will always be a vital part of this country. Of course, Trump's most vocal and visible supporters were perplexed by Lamar's messaging. Colorado Rep. Lauren Boebert took to X to share that she was confused by Lamar's lyricism. "Tell me I'm not the only one needing subtitles for this," the problematic politician wrote. No one expected Turning Point USA founder President Charlie Kirk to understand rap music, but he still decided to share his bafflement surrounding to Lamar's stellar set. "This music is not my style," Kirk dryly exclaimed on X. Seeing as the 2024 Republican National Convention boasted performers like Kid Rock and Chris Johnson, it's no surprise that Lamar failed to connect to Trump's base, and that was the point. Now, former North Carolina Rep. Madison Crowthorne suggested that the halftime show should have just been at real Donald Trump dancing to YMCA. It's unclear if he was actually serious about that. Donald Trump's former Attorney General pick, Matt Gaetz, also gave his thoughts on the halftime show. However, the dots he laid out simply don't connect. The halftime show you just watched is clearly the regime's response to Trump's historic gains with Black men, Gaetz stated. However, this claim was so inaccurate that X fact-checked him by explaining Kendrick Lamar was announced as the halftime show several months before Trump won. If there's one thing MAGA is going to do, it's whine, and their response to Lamar's performance means he got his point across. Now, we've seen many conservative politicians and commentators expressing their displeasure with Lamar's performance as part of a mass MAGA outburst. The critics' incapacity to comprehend his lyrics appeared to be the main source of criticism. Now, Matt Walsh, a conservative pundit, called the performance easily the worst halftime show he had ever witnessed. Halftime is garbage, he continued. No one can even comprehend what he's saying, and most of these songs are completely unknown to the vast majority of football fans. The performance didn't seem to pique President Donald Trump's interest either. About 2 minutes before Lamar's performance concluded, the president left his box at the Caesars Superdome in New Orleans, according to Brian Stelter of CNN. Now, another conservative pundit, Michael Knowles, attempted a more neutral stance, saying this halftime show is gibberish, but at least it appears to be patriotic. However, not everyone was so cynical, with Ben Stiller calling Lamar's performance the best halftime show ever, tennis player Coco Gauff calling herself a Kendrick fan forever, and rapper Doechii congratulating Lamar and guest performer SZA. You know, in reality, the halftime show was fine, and Kendrick Lamar is an excellent rapper, and these people took issue with the show because it didn't fit into their narrow post-war vision of America. But neither does a very large chunk of this country. This isn't the first time Kendrick Lamar has performed at the Super Bowl, and it isn't the first time blackness has been a major theme of the show, and yet MAGA continues to cry about it. Now, early in his performance, Lamar speaks of the revolution, telling the audience that the revolution is about to be televised. You picked the right time, but the wrong guy. The line was in reference to Jill Scott Heron's in 1971 poem, The Revolution Will Not Be Televised, which argues that change does not come from corporations but individuals, and that the media will not showcase the violence of artisanship. But Lamar's wrong guy reference, some social media users speculated, was a direct attack on President Trump, who was in attendance Sunday. Now, while Trump won the support of several prominent hip-hop artists, including Lil Wayne and Kodak Black, Lamar has been known to criticize the president, including in his songs The Heart Part 4 and XXX. Now, the set for Lamar's performance sent its own message. As the rapper and his all-black dancers spun around the field, it soon became clear they were performing in a prison yard. The set was designed to highlight the issue of mass incarceration and the racial disparities of those behind bars. Black Americans are incarcerated at much higher rates than palm-color Americans, even for the same crimes. Though Lamar has never faced incarceration, he often raps about the carceral system's impact on Black Americans, such as his featured appearance on Beyonce's song Freedom, where he calls for opening correctional gates in higher deserts. Now, Sunday's performance was not the first live show Lamar has used to highlight the disparities of the justice system. At his 2016 Grammys performance, he dressed in a prison uniform and led a chain gang of backup dancers across the stage as musicians performed in prison cells. Now, I think one of the things that is making MAGA supporters mad is one of the statements that he said in his rap, 40 acres and mule. This is bigger than the music. Now, the line was in reference to reparations promised to Black Americans following the end of slavery. On January 16, 1865, Union Gen William T. Sherman's Special Field Order No. 15 called for each formerly enslaved family to receive 40 acres of land, and the promise was never fulfilled, and the order is often raised in conversations around reparations for Black Americans. We have finally come to the end of the video, but what do our viewers have to say? Share your thoughts, your views, your contributions as well in the comment section. Thank you for always watching, and see you in our next video as we bring you another video.